Good morning once again, everyone. Thank you for taking the opportunity to join us in this very important forum about returning to the campus, particularly with a focus on faculty in the fall. We're excited to have you join us. We have an excellent panel today that I will introduce just shortly. There are a few topics that are of more interest to the campus community than the idea of re-engaging the campus and how we might manage the process of the business of serving the students moving forward. And so I'm really happy that we're able to have this conversation now to discuss where we are in our planning with regards to the fall. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Charles Robinson. I'm Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs. And all that means is that I get the chance to work with a very, very excellent group of people who are dedicated to the campus community. And they're part of this webinar to really give us a sense of where we intend to be and where we intend to go relative to our operations. Before we get started, I want to just take a moment to recognize the excellent faculty, students, and staff who are part of the Eleanor Mann Nursing School of Nursing. It's a wonderful program. They have done a great job in helping us facilitate vaccinating our campus community. And I want to extend my gratitude on behalf of, again, the University Administration and the entire campus for the role that our nursing faculty and staff and students have played with regards to supporting the campus. So didn't want that to go without being said. It's very, very important. We're very grateful. What I'd like to do now is turn our attention to our panelists and introduce each of them before we start answering questions. Some of the questions have been pre-submitted and we will address those first. Of course, people who are listening have an opportunity to submit questions, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can. If we don't get to your question, we encourage you to continue to look at our planning that is being updated regularly relative to our COVID mitigation and our planning for operations. It's updated and it's on our website. And it's being regularly attended to as the guidance continues to modify. Now let's turn to the panelists. First, we have Terry Martin, who is the Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs. I've worked with Terry every day. He does a great job in helping to keep us honest and straight on the issues relative to academic affairs. So very happy to have him part of this. We have also Kathy Sloan, fellow historian of mine, a fellow colleague in the Department of History, also Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs. Scott Turley, we're excited to have him. He is the Associate Vice Chancellor of Facilities Management. Scott, thank you for participating. Our own Dr. Huda Sharaf. Huda is probably the most famous of all of us in this period. Everybody wants to hear from Huda. And she is the Medical Director of the Pat Walker Health Center. Janelle Kovic-Diaz, Associate Director of Accommodation and Accessibility Coordinator, Office of Equal Opportunity and Compliance. Janelle, thank you. I know you're under the weather and you're taking one for the team. We really appreciate you participating. Our own Captain Matt Mills, he's been our emergency manager since day one. Couldn't have done it without you, Matt. Thank you for the excellent work that you've done throughout this entire crisis. And of course, there's still more to do. So thank you for joining this panel. We're going to go ahead and get started and answering these questions that have been pre-submitted. And then we will move on and see where we are with regards to submitted questions. Again, let's get started. I want to begin by taking a look at the remote work, the new remote work policy. Terry, I know that's coming to us soon. Could you talk a little bit about some of the detail that this new remote work policy will have?
There's we took a look at what was the existing telecommuting policy, And we've kind of updated, if you would, to today's environment where we have so much, where we have the remote working opportunities. It's going to provide some guidance on how we can, what jobs or what opportunities there are, positions for being able to work remotely, how to go through that to get the approval. The purpose of the remote working policy is just to kind of have some consistency across campus in every aspect of what we're doing. And hopefully that flexible work policy will be available in a few weeks. It still has some feedback that we have to get from some constituents. It's not quite ready, but I think that it's pretty close.
Thank you, Terry. I know that there's a lot of interest in this policy, not just for the fall, but also for the summer return. I want to turn my attention now to Huda. I'm going to put you on the spot to talk about guidance. It seems that guidance is modifying all the time relative to the COVID issues, the COVID crisis. Could you talk a little bit about what the guidance is with regards to masking both in and outside, and where do we, and I know this is a projection, but where do you think we might be by August?
Okay, no problem, Provost. So, the one thing I guess we have learned through this pandemic is how often things are changing and being updated, sometimes on a daily basis, if not a weekly basis. So when we look at the start of the fall semester, you're looking at, this is over 3 months from now. So, obviously our hope is that things continue to improve. More and more people become vaccinated and we get closer to herd immunity. The bottom line is that that's going to really determine what type of things can open up perhaps, and what kind of latitude can be had with classrooms, wearing masks. Just like the provost said, these are all projections, educated guesses. And so, obviously we'll always follow the guidelines from the CDC and the ADH, as we've been doing since all of this hit our campus March of 2020. And so that won't change. Currently the recommendations, physical distancing for institutes of higher ed campuses are still at 6 feet, but we don't know. Maybe that might change by August. Again, that's why we have to just constantly be reading and staying up to date on all the latest guidelines. Right now, masks on our campus continue to be required, and that will continue until told otherwise. We know that it works. We know wearing masks works. Even looking back at our flu season, I've been practicing medicine now for 21 years and never experienced such a light flu season. I think Washington Regional Hospital maybe had 1 admission for flu. And, they're like, why is that? The major reason is because masks work. People are wearing masks. They're avoiding being in large groups, being in crowded areas. And so that was a plus, that thankfully we didn't have a lot of flu cases on top of COVID. But again, we know that masks work. So, continuing with this, we'll continue to update the campus regarding the guidelines. We may see an announcement coming forward, perhaps being a little bit more open with not wearing masks when you're outside, because they feel like the transmission is really, really low when people are outside. And, we've already seen a little bit of opening with those that are fully vaccinated. Again, that's also an initiative for people to get vaccinated, because now you can be with other people that are fully vaccinated in a room without wearing masks. And maybe you might be able to visit your parents and maybe people will be able to visit their grandchildren. So, I'll say that in general terms, that I'm very, very hopeful moving forward that things will start returning closer to a normal pattern. But we'll just have to wait and see.
Thank you, Huda. Scott, there are questions about ventilations and whether or not the campus has taken up the necessary precautions to mitigate the spread through the ventilation system. Can you talk a little bit about that, particularly with regards to larger classes? Because
Dr. Robinson. So in general, our strategies have followed both CDC and ASHRAE, American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers guidance. The first line of defense for that is ventilation, just for the reason that we're thinking now if you're outside, you don't need a mask. The best thing we can do for interior spaces is to ventilate them as much as we can. And so we implemented those steps last spring. You've probably noticed in certain buildings, bathroom exhaust fans running. That's just a way to bring more outside air into the building. So we've kind of called that our max ventilation strategy. We just, as much as we can, put as much fresh air in the buildings as we can. Second thing we've done is run our systems 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Normally for energy conservation, we cycle certain systems off in non-research facilities. Again, last spring, we put all of our systems on 24/7, move the air through the building, introduce that fresh air, turn the, kind of get as many air changes per hour as we can inside of our buildings. The third thing that does then is also moves that air then across filters. And so over the course of the summer and into the fall, and even honestly still continuing, we are upgrading filters across campus, following again ASHRAE and CDC recommendations. There's been some challenges, frankly, to get that done, and that's mainly because of the market demand for those products just completely overwhelmed the ability of the market to produce those. And they were also competing. It turns out that those filter materials are the same filters you use to make N95 masks and other PPE, and those were a higher priority from the production perspective. So those things we continue to do, and we'll continue those until CDC and then by CDC to ASHRAE tells us that we can start backing off of those. So.
Thanks, Scott. It's important for people to understand that we're constantly looking for ways to maintain the healthy atmospheres that we have, and as we have more students returning, we're going to be very much involved in trying to keep the air quality good in our classroom. So thank you for your leadership on that. Let's turn to a topic that will absolutely create a conversation, a very, very lengthy conversation with just about any faculty member. Remote teaching. Kathy and Terry, you might want to tag team this one. We've had 3 semesters now in which faculty have had pretty much the right to teach remotely with very little question. What's the plan for the fall, and how do we intend to and why are we moving in this direction? Either one. Kathy, why don't you start? You're muted, Kathy.
Well, my space bar did not work on that one, but I do want to say that it's April 27th, and at this point, our plan is to be 100% face-to-face in the fall, just like we were in fall of 2019. Of course, we have to be agile, as Provost Robinson's always reminding us, but really the only way to teach remotely is if you have an ADA accommodation. Terry?
You're setting me up for a question I intend to ask very, very, very soon. But Terry, before I ask that question, and Janelle, so get ready. Why is there this insistence on returning to the face-to-face?
I couldn't hear you.
Why are you insisting now to return to face-to-face for the fall in terms of teaching?
What are we doing now?
Why are we returning to the face?
Oh. Well, for one, we think, based on what we've seen in the last month or so, we think that we're going to be where we can safely return to the classroom in normal, what we've done before. And we know how to pivot and go back to teaching remotely if we need to, but we are looking at and anticipating that we can be in the classrooms in a safe environment by the fall and be able to teach all of those face-to-face and as we've done before, and get returned back to what we were doing. And as Kathy said, there are some opportunities through OEOC to get accommodations to teach remotely if you need to, but for the most part, we're planning to be back unless the pandemic says differently. That's what we're planning to do.
All right, thank you, Terry. Janelle, there have been references to remote teaching and also accommodations for the possibility that a person might be allowed to teach remotely. Although we don't expect that to be, a readily available outcome, because most people thankfully don't need an accommodation. What talk a little bit about that and what that involves, maybe the requirements for this type of process.
Sure, thank you. So the reasonable accommodation process for individuals with disabilities is for individuals who have their own disability. It is not for those who are trying to care for others. There's the FMLA process for that. There's also, we've had some questions about individuals who are pregnant or taking care of children as well. That also does not go through the OEOC process for accommodations for disability. That goes through either the FMLA process or their own maternity and paternity leave policies on campus that you would work with your departments for if you fall in those realms. However, if you have your own medical condition that rises to the level of a disability, and a disability is one that is classified as affecting a major life activity. So that could be breathing, that could be mental capacity, all those kind of things. What is required is that if it's not an obvious condition, usually if an individual is in a wheelchair, that would be one that would be considered obvious. Excuse me, we wouldn't require medical documentation for that. But if it is not an obvious condition, we will require medical documentation. That can be found on the OEOC website. We have a specific form for leave and remote work request. So that would be provided to the individual's medical provider, and that can be provided back to OEOC either through the online portal. With the online portal, that's where the request comes in. It can be attached. There's specific questions that we ask that we need in order to review and then process to make sure we have the eligibility to even go through the accommodation process. Or if you can do the online portal first, and then have your medical provider either fax it, or if you want to mail it to OEOC or email it, we also take it in various forms. But we will need both in order to process any accommodation request. Now, understand when I say process, that's just OEOC determined to make sure there is a disability that can be looked at for an accommodation. Once we do that process, then we work with the department and the employee to talk about what is a reasonable accommodation. We take information back from the employee, make sure that we're taking in consideration all their concerns, any plans that they may have, and then take that to the department and talk about what is reasonable. As you indicated, we all are aware that the campus is under guidelines to come back to face-to-face instruction. And so that will be a consideration when these are discussed. The department can absolutely take that into consideration. If it is a situation where a reasonable accommodation cannot be granted and may be denied, one of the things that we look at is those safety precautions that are happening in the workplace. And so we may be able to address it that way. But it's an interactive process is what it's called. And it's really a conversation between all the parties to see what is reasonable for the institution, what can be accepted and what cannot, and then talk about if it cannot, what can we do to make sure that everybody's comfortable still.
Thank you, Janelle. And I guess if people have more questions, they can contact you and your office to learn more about the process, because it's one that that requires a kind of an understanding, and there's some detail that has to be understood and followed. Matt, let me turn to you. Of course, there is consideration of a bill to prevent state agencies from requiring masking if that successfully passes out of the legislature and becomes law. How will the university respond?
Thank you, sir. So if that passes, if it's vetoed by the governor and then subsequently overridden, the university would have to comply with the state law, which means that we would not be able to require masking on our campus, just as municipalities wouldn't be able to, and many other entities as well. However, that does not diminish the fact that we would still encourage folks to continue to wear masks, to be responsible for their actions and their interactions with other folks. So while we may not be able to mandate it if that passes, we would definitely continue to encourage it, especially for those who are not comfortable in the environment that they are working in or attending class in.
Thanks, Matt. And so again, if the law passes, we won't be able to ignore the law because it's a law, but at the same time, there's nothing in the law that prevents us from encouraging faculty, staff, and students to wear masks, to get vaccinated, to be smart about how they help to keep the community safer. And that's what we would absolutely do. Really try to push this and socialize this as something that we can do to help each other. And so I think that's really important to underscore. Let's turn our attention a little bit now to this. I mean, there's some questions about contact tracing. I'll stay with you, Matt. You know, we will probably have COVID cases in the fall. How will we manage those?
We'll manage those the same way that we've managed them since last March. The only difference will be that after June 15th, the CARES Act money runs out and UAMS will no longer be earmarked to do contact tracing for higher education. So we've been very fortunate over the last year to have a handful of UAMS folks dedicated to the contact tracing specifically for higher ed. After June 15th, when those monies run out, it will default back to Arkansas Department of Health and their two contract groups, AFMC and GDTI are the two contact groups that will do the contact tracing for us. So in the caseload that we currently have in the state, that shouldn't be a problem. If we see a large spike like we did last August, then it will probably pose a problem for us in regards to the amount of time it takes to start that investigation and contact tracing. So that'll be something that we'll be watching very, very closely, working with our partners through both ADH, UAMS, and ADHE to try to mitigate quickly if we see a spike coming our way.
Thank you, Matt. Huda, there have been questions about vaccinations and requirements. Could you talk a little bit about whether or not the university is considering requiring vaccinations and where we are at this time on the vaccination issue?
Sure. So currently the vaccines that are available in the US are Pfizer, Moderna, and Janssen, also called Janssen, also called Johnson & Johnson. I get that question a lot. They're all the same thing. So Johnson & Johnson and Janssen are the same vaccine. And they're all currently approved by the FDA, but they're approved for what's called emergency use authorization. With that approval, it makes it difficult for organizations to require vaccination. Right now, the University of Arkansas does not have any current plans to require COVID vaccination for faculty, staff, or students. You know, as we all know now that, you know, any person 16 years and older is able to get the vaccine. And thankfully, our area included, we're seeing a surplus of doses. So it really should not be an issue for someone to get the vaccine administered if they truly want that. You know, the constant battle that we have is trying to address why people aren't getting it and trying to provide, you know, evidence and data that supports the safety and efficacy of the vaccines. And so, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, hopefully moving forward in the fall will be better, that hopefully a lot of our students will have completed their vaccine series and are fully vaccinated. And that will decrease transmission on campus, as well as our faculty and staff obviously also being fully vaccinated. One of the issues across the country right now are people who initiated Pfizer and Moderna and that are failing to show up for their second doses. That's kind of a big deal. because they're really not going to reach that 95% effective level without getting that second dose. So I would encourage anyone on this call, and if you have not received it, even if it's past the 4 weeks, even if it's been 6 weeks, just get your second dose of the same one you started. You don't have to start the series all over again. You just need to get the second dose. So hopefully overall, campus will be a safer place because a lot of us will have had full vaccines. And so hopefully we'll have decreased transmission. The other thing I want to say is right now, Pat Walker Health Center, we're very fortunate to have both types. We're both fortunate to have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and Pfizer. And we are accepting appointments from spouses of faculty and staff on campus. And so I would encourage all of you to make that appointment and get vaccinated. There is some information, so I'll address the elephant in the room regarding the issues with Johnson & Johnson or Janssen or Janssen, they're all the same, and the pause that took place now, I guess about a week and a half ago. And it was paused because they found 6 people that had developed clots. And they wanted to, the FDA and the CDC wanted to pause it. Keep in mind that 6 people out of 7 million doses that were administered in this country. So we just need to keep everything in perspective. All right, because nothing in life is definite except for your death and taxes. So we just need to keep that in perspective. All right. And so they paused, they basically reviewed all of the data, and they found that these people that had developed these clots were all women aged 18 to 49. On average, that occurred on the 6th day after receiving the vaccine. And again, these were headaches that occurred and just became more and more severe as time went on. You know, most of us are going to feel really crummy the day after we get the vaccine. It lasts 24 hours, it goes away, you're fine. And that a lot of times that's a headache. So that's nothing to worry about. But they made the decision to go ahead and lift the pause because the benefit from the vaccine far outweighed any associated risk. And so what we're saying now at Pat Walker Health Center is that if we have a female patient call us and they're 25, we'll say, well, we have Pfizer. You know, Pfizer and Moderna have both administered over 180 million doses in this country with no clot formation found. So we will likely recommend Pfizer because we have the luxury that we have it. That's not always the case. But we recognize that some people may say, no, we want Johnson & Johnson because we want to have one dose. We hate needles. We want to be one and done. And that's okay. We'll offer that too, because the benefit of the vaccines far outweigh any associated risk. And the way to end the pandemic is through vaccination. So.
Well, Huda, I know this may seem an elementary question, but could you underscore how the vaccine really does help prevent a person from catching COVID-19 and how it really has proven thus far to be very effective in that regard?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I could talk hours, but I won't because I won't bore everyone. So basically what it is all these vaccines, what they end up doing is they trigger your body to make an immunity army. And it's antibodies. You'll hear that word a lot, but it's basically an army of antibodies. And how it works is that it triggers that immune response in you. So that way when you're faced and that immune response, what it does is it recognizes those little spikes on the coronavirus. And as soon as your body sees those spikes, that army goes to business and says, we must neutralize it. And so that's basically what happens. So if I'm exposed to someone who has COVID, and for whatever reason that droplet enters me, I have an army ready and waiting that says, oh no, that does not belong in Huda. We're going to attack that particle, neutralize it. She's going to stay just fine. And that's how the vaccine works. Right now, they think that it lasts at least 6 months. They're hoping it lasts a year. Maybe we might need a booster. But regardless, it decreases the chances of you getting infected. and absolutely decreases if you do get infected, because again, nothing in life is 100% except for death and taxes. But if you do get infected, you will have mild symptoms, no hospitalization, and no long-term effects.
Thank you.
So there's really no reason in my mind that someone cannot get vaccinated. And so, like I said, I mean, I could talk about it so long because I'm truly an advocate for that. And the more of us that get vaccinated, the safer the campus will be.
Thank you, Huda. Terry, Kathy, questions come up about syllabi and whether or not faculty will have the authority to require students in their classes to wear masks while in the class. I think it's important to underscore, the law here potentially. Again, if the law passes, what will be the limits of faculty authority in if the law passes?
I would say that if the law is there, that we're going to have to, abide by the law. Hopefully, if it is that is the law, we will obey the law. We'll do everything else that we possibly can to make our classrooms safe. At this point, it's hard to predict where we will be with the pandemic, because this is, April, where it's going to be when August comes around, based on what we've done, seen in the last 2 months, the changes around here with the vaccine. I say we're a good chance to be fairly safe, but we will obey the law. But we will also take a look at CDC, ADH, and other experts on what we can do to make our classroom safe. I think we've done that, and I think we will continue to have ways to which we will make our classroom safe for everyone.
Thanks. Kathy, would you like to add anything?
I would just add, if the law doesn't pass, I mean, we'll just continue to follow CDC and ADH recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, more COVID questions. Let's take a look at the issue of recording lectures. I guess I'm back to Kathy and Terry again. Will that be required? And will we need to have a hybrid approach at all based on our planning for the fall?
I'll start and Kathy, you can come in.
Good.
We're going to have to record classes again, because if we do have a case of COVID, a student, we would prefer to have that opportunity for them to be able to see the lecture afterwards. We're not going to force anyone to do a hybrid class. No, the student will not have the option to be able to view the class live. That will be the faculty's choice. And I want to say about the recording, there is a way in Blackboard that the faculty can control who sees the lectures in the recording. So the students won't be able to just not come to class and then go see the recording, because the faculty will have control over who they let see. If someone has an excused absence, then they can let them see the lecture. So I think the faculty as attendance, we can require that. And that's up to the instructor how they want to run their class. They won't have to do a hybrid, which everyone agrees is a very difficult way to manage. Some people can manage. It depends on the class for one. So they have that, the faculty have that control on how they want to do that. Kathy?
Yeah, I might add that, many of us or many of you have not been in a classroom in over a year. And I actually would do this every year pre-COVID, is get retrained on the smart classroom and the capabilities and how to record your lectures in that format, in that classroom, because nothing's more upsetting than like fumbling around with technology when you're trying to get a class started. So contact your IT people in your college, but also remember, TIPS is always there too for advice.
Thank you, Kathy. So Donnell, the question's been raised. How long does the accommodation process take?
There's no set period of time. It does depend on how long it takes for the employee to provide all the required information. And then it can be as quick as, a week or two. But it can be extended if there has to be additional back and forth conversations. I did see the question about how soon should they request the accommodations. I usually say as soon as possible. I will say that there may be some ebb and flow because of all of the planning and all the different considerations that are happening for the fall. But I would prefer if we knew how many requests we're going to have as soon as possible, so we can go ahead and get the process started so the departments can make those informed decisions.
Thank you. Matt, the question about the housing units and quarantining, and will we still have that for the fall? Will there be a plan for quarantining students who are determined to have COVID? And also, will students still be required to inform us of a positive COVID test?
Yeah, so the mandatory self-report will still be in place for students, faculty, and staff, whether they test on or off campus or they live on or off campus. As far as the quarantine for close contacts, if you have an individual, and Huda can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have an individual who's fully vaccinated, they no longer are required to quarantine as we had in the past. Now, if you are vaccinated and test positive, you're still required to isolate. And yes, I'm sure that Flo and housing will do the same outstanding job they did for us this academic year in providing those spaces. And it was invaluable for us to be able to relocate those students within housing. And a lot of students honestly chose to go home for either their isolation or quarantine period, which will still be available for them, since they've got to, they would have to attend remotely anyway at that point. So that was a choice that some of those students made to be at home during that period. But we will continue to use the same model as far as we've discussed in the past for the upcoming semester as well.
Thanks, Matt. Huda, the booster, you referenced it, and somebody had a question about the, will it be available in August? Do you have any sense of when and if boosters will be available?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know the chat question was someone had received, I guess, completed their Pfizer vaccine series in February and wanted to know about a booster before the fall semester begins. What's really anticipated with the infectious disease and epidemiologists' leadership in our state is that they really do expect that right now they're saying, 6 months. They really do expect once they get closer to 6 months that they're going to extend that immunity period another 6 months. There's the first COVID vaccine was administered in the United States in the middle of December. And so we're already past, we're past the 4-month mark, and they really haven't seen a waning of the immune response. And so they expect, and Pfizer, I think, released a statement about a week or two ago stating that they do feel that the immunity from Pfizer will last at least 1 year, but perhaps a booster towards the end of that year. Now that they have the platform, and that has been discovered and studied for COVID vaccine development, adjusting that to cover some of the variants is, in general terms, a much easier process. That's actually what happens with flu vaccine every single year. And so, we won't have to wait like another year for them to develop a booster shot. Now that all the hard work's already been done, and then there'll just have to be some minor adjustments in the vaccine to adequately cover some of the variants. So hopefully at least 1 year, and then maybe a booster towards the end of that year. But again, more information to come regarding all of that.
Thank you. Matt, quick question on the difference between isolation and quarantining.
Yeah, great question. Isolation is for sick people. I mean, that's the easiest way to determine. If you test positive for COVID, then you have to isolate for 10 days, assuming that you're not hospitalized. If you're hospitalized, then you isolate for 20. Quarantine is for those who have had direct contact and meet the threshold, which is currently greater than 15 minutes in a 24-hour period cumulative. So if you've had that exposure to somebody who's a known positive, then you would have to quarantine. And what we are saying from the university perspective is a 10-day quarantine as well. So you're either going to isolate or quarantine for 10 days. But the biggest difference is the isolation is for those that are sick.
Thank you, Matt. Scott, it is possible, or likely even, that we'll have lots of students on campus in August, and outdoor events, that's an issue that we'll probably have more of those. Is there any planning from a facilities management standpoint to help facilitate those safely that you can talk about at this point?
I think the things we would do for outdoor events would be consistent with what we've done in the past. We would provide hand sanitizer, probably enhanced cleaning of those facilities that are related to those outdoor events. A lot of these are just, doing the things we've been doing. So hand washing, distancing where we can, mask wearing where we're able. And so for outdoor events, I think probably the main thing would be hand sanitizer and then continued mask wearing.
Right, and I think the point to underscore is that the university intends to treat this COVID issue very seriously in the fall. Like we are going to be very proactive in trying to mitigate in every way that we possibly can. And we are not going to move away from the sense that it's really important for us to put a lot of energy behind this. And I appreciate that FAMA is going to play a role in that, as they have been playing throughout the entire crisis. Terry, I've got a question from faculty members about recording. Is there any wiggle room on recording?
Sure. I saw some question about the art classes. There's some classes, laboratories and things, you can't record those very easily. The lecture classes are the ones that we're talking about recording. But yeah, there's some wiggle room with certain styles of classes that you just can't record very easily. And that was the case we had this last year as well.
Kathy, what do you think why do you think there is a concern? Well, let me better phrase this way. Talk about the concerns that faculty, from your understanding, what they have about the fall. What are their real concerns here? And maybe underscore some of the steps that we're taking to try to meet those concerns.
Well, I think the concern is about, certainly this mask bill that's in our legislature right now. I don't know the status of that currently, but I think that there's a lot more confidence about coming back to the classroom if people are masked, because they've listened to Dr. Sharaf and others, and they know that that's effective. I think that they can be assured that we will, like Scott mentioned, keep the ventilation systems active and fresh and cleaning, and we could have some sort of rules about social distancing or masking, that they'll be more confident. I mean, frankly, if the bill passes in the Arkansas legislature, that's a whole new ballgame that we'll have to pivot and try to figure out what we're going to do.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, well, we're really down to the portion where I think we've covered the fundamental questions. Terry, 12-month faculty, when should they return? Is the June 14th date relevant to 12-month faculty, or is there another timeline that you have in mind?
Yeah, the June 14th is relative to all employees. So if you're employed during the summer, everybody's expected to be back on or before June 14th. If you're if you're a 9-month faculty and you're not employed in the summer, you're not expected to be back until August. But if you're an employee receiving pay this summer, we're expecting everybody to be back on campus as we normally would be conducting this summer in the summer operations.
Huda, can a person ask another person about their vaccination status?
You can, but if they answer no, you can't keep asking. And so you can ask if someone, I've done this, are you fully vaccinated? Yes or no. And if it's no, you cannot go down that rabbit hole of why not. And, you cannot risk the fact of asking for personal information, medical information, but you can in general terms ask if someone's been fully vaccinated.
Thank you, Huda. All right, Matt, what do you think your challenges are going to be besides, everything? Maybe some of the ones you could prioritize for this coming fall?
So that's a great question. It is, to piggyback real quick on Huda, for those who may not be familiar, fully vaccinated simply means that you've had both doses of either Pfizer or Moderna, or the one dose of Johnson & Johnson, Janssen, and it's been 14 days since that second dose. So just because you've had the second dose doesn't mean fully vaccinated. It's 14 days past your last dose, whether that's one or two doses. But the challenges we're going to see are the same challenges we've seen for the last 12 months. And a lot of it right now, as Kathy mentioned, is a confidence deal, and a confidence in the mask, confidence in the ability to conduct our classes and our activities. One of the things that we're really seeing, and I hate to use the term, but it's COVID fatigue, and folks are getting tired of wearing masks. They're getting tired of being inside. It's warming up. We're going to see more people outside, more activities with larger groups. And that's going to be one of the biggest challenges right off the top. Just like Scott mentioned, we anticipate larger outside events. We anticipate larger inside events, especially if and when mask mandates become less restrictive, either through state legislature and or through CDC guidelines. There's been several questions about mandating the vaccine. I will tell you that both Huda and I have asked the question of ADH, ADHE, and there's no intent from either entity to mandate the vaccine across the state, either at the ADH level or the ADHE level. So we don't anticipate that changing anytime in the near future. So that's going to be a challenge of those folks who are vaccine hesitant for whatever reason, that they just don't want to participate and be vaccinated. There's nothing we can do about that. Just as Huda mentioned, we can't chase them down that rabbit hole of to why they don't want to. So we have to assume that personal responsibility. And if our choice is to continue to wear a mask, whether there's a mandate or not, then we continue to wear a mask. And understand that that's how we will eventually beat this and return to what we know to be normal.
Thank you, Matt. Terry, there's been a question that's submitted. I think it's one we need to address. And that's the question about how would we maintain face-to-face and full classes and deal with social distancing requirements?
Well, that's going to be a very difficult thing to do. We have said in the past we could try to do some hybrid classes. That has proved to be very difficult to manage for the faculty. But the reality is, if we have to go to a 6 foot spacing, we literally do not have the classroom capacity on this campus to have our classes. Our largest classroom, when we have the 6 foot spacing, is the student union ballroom, and that's at about 100 students. So we really just, if we get to the point that we have to do 6 foot spacing, it's not going to be a really good situation for us in that situation. But I would say that we're hopeful that it'll get there. And I want to say that I saw our campus step up to the plate when we had the MMR issue like a year and a half ago, I guess it was now. Our campus stepped up to the plate and did what we needed to do. And I think our campus will step up to the plate and become our students and our faculty and staff we'll get a high rate of vaccination around this campus. I know that and if we get a very high rate of vaccinations, this is going to make our situation get a lot better as far as teaching face-to-face in the fall. And I'm confident that this faculty, this campus, and this community will do what we need to do to make that happen. And so I'm very optimistic that we're going to be back face-to-face with a good situation because of the vaccine in the fall.
Thank you, Terry. I share your optimism, and I believe that despite the challenges, we will do everything we can to return to relative normality and keep people safe at the same time. And the question has come up, and you touched on this a little bit, but maybe it's important to underscore, why do we require some vaccines and not others?
So yeah, I saw that question in the chat. So COVID-19, while it is FDA approved, it has, again, it's not a full FDA approval. Now, by saying that, I'm not saying the vaccine is safe, but it is under a special type of approval from the FDA called an emergency use authorization. You'll hear people say EUA, EUA, it has an EUA. That basically means it has an emergency use authorization from the FDA. There's no doubt that they will likely eventually get full approval from the FDA. But until that happens, it's very difficult to require COVID-19 vaccination. Now, MMR, there were reasons. MMR has been around for decades. It's got full FDA approval. There are actually, to be honest, with MMR, it has more restrictions on actually who can get it than the COVID vaccines. I mean, the COVID vaccines pretty much can be given to almost anyone, regardless of whether you have a weak immune system or not. And that's not the case with MMR. With MMR, it has to do with outbreaks that have been identified on campuses of higher ed, mumps and measles in recent history. Now, who's to say moving forward, once COVID-19 gets full approval from the FDA, and depending on how this pandemic goes, whether perhaps a requirement will be made. But again, that's a guess. And so we don't know that. But it's definitely not something that's been ruled out definitively.
Sure.
So again, we'll see what happens.
Thank you. And we've just about run out of time, but I want to thank each of the panelists for not just participating in this program, but also for the work you've done throughout this entire pandemic to help support the campus community. And you've done great work, and you continue to stay in touch with changes and be open to ideas about how we might move forward in a positive way. And I want to underscore Terry's remarks about the future. I think looks much brighter, and we have to continue to work to get people vaccinated and to encourage people to do their very best to protect each other from the spread, to mitigate the chances that others will contract this very deadly disease. And so thank you so much for the work you continue to do. I am certain we will have more conversations as we move closer to the fall, as we will definitely talk again to make sure that we are answering people's questions. And feel free to reach out to relative panelists as you need to get more information about your particular concerns. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.